Hello and welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 75, brought to you by Wicked Tree Gear. Today we're cranking up another DIY report mini-series, this time with Dan Infalt, and we're discussing hunting the wind in farm country. All right, what is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you all are doing well out there. Today we got a cool show. I'm pretty pumped up about today's show. It's a guy who is very familiar to many of you, I'm sure. We have Dan Infalt, the big buck serial killer, joining us. This is his second appearance on the podcast. We had him back on, I think, episode 16, if I'm remembering correctly, where we just kind of talked about hunting pressured deer and, of course, what he's very well known for, which is hunting buck beds and finding buck beds and his scouting. But today we're taking a little bit of a different approach. We're doing another installment here of the DIY Report mini-series, which I'm excited to do. As many of you probably know, this is kind of a mini-series where we take a more, complicated or a nuanced topic, and we try to break it down into very small pieces that you can kind of take away some best practices and some ideas from that you can kind of take straight from the podcast and start to put them into use. And so we're doing the same thing here with Dan, but what we're doing is a new topic, and I kind of came up with this topic because of the different types of land that I'm hunting, specifically this year. So typically growing up, and even for the most part now, I hunt a lot of farm country, family farms and stuff like that. Some public land as well I mix in there. So I get kind of the farm country and hill country, and some of the farmland that I hunt is also kind of encapsulated in hill country. And so the wind plays, a specific way in both of those instances. In some cases for me, they play similarly because of where the farmland is. It's kind of in some of the more mountainy kind of areas of Pennsylvania. This year, however, just as of last week, I gained access to a piece of ground that's probably, I want to say right around 50 acres-ish, might be 60 acres, that is a lot of swamp. And I've never hunted swamp before. So this is going to be a little bit new for me. And so I started thinking about the idea that I hunt these three kind of distinct areas: farmland, hill country, and swamps. And I know Dan is, of course, an expert when it comes to hunting those three areas, to the point that he's actually made DVDs about all these things. And thought it'd be cool to kind of have him come on and talk about how you hunt the wind and what the wind does and what you kind of have to be aware of in each one of those different applications. And so today what we're doing is we're going to start off with farm country. As many of you probably know, Dan is great at kind of describing what he's seen in the woods, and he's always willing to share his information, and this is no different here. The one thing I will mention here at the top, though, is I want to make a quick mention about it, is he does have, because he does have a new product that's coming out, and I want to make sure to mention this before I forget. He's got some sticks coming out, some climbing sticks that are super light. I want to say they're right around 2 pounds. They're made kind of for the mobile hunter. You can find out more information on the Hunting Beast about them, the Hunting Beast forum, thehuntingbeast.com. And of course, the Hunting Beast Facebook page. So if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and check those out. I'm not sure when they're releasing. I want to say I thought it was August 10th, but I might be mistaken. So just be on the lookout for that. And before we get Dan on the line here, let's take a quick second to talk about our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. First and foremost, we are brought to you by Wicked Tree Gear, the longest, fastest cutting, toughest tree trimming equipment you have ever used. Simply put, the toughest saws on earth. How tough are they? Tough enough to come with a lifetime warranty. And right now, when you visit wickedtreegear.com, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout, and you will save yourself 20% discount on your Wicked purchase. We're also brought to you by Exodus Outdoor Gear. The Trek camera comes in at a $145 price point, has the same proprietary shell design as the Lift Series camera, same 5-year warranty and unmatched customer service policies, photo, video, time-lapse, and hybrid modes, all with a single line backlit LED display. You also get about 20,000 images on one set of lithium batteries, and if you'd like to learn more about the Exodus trail cameras, check them out at ExodusOutdoorGear.com. And if you like what you see, save yourself $20 and use the promo code TRUTH at checkout. We're also brought to you by Tecumani Seed. I actually just put some of this in the ground yesterday because I got a little break in the rain. I used the Tecumani Wicked Greens. And everything is bigger in Texas. No matter if you're in the South, Midwest, or Northeast, Tecumani has your food plot needs covered. Visit Tecumani.com and check out their product selector tool to help pick the right seed for your food plots. Use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and save 20%. Last but not least, while I was doing all my food plot work, sweating like a beast in the sun, I was using my Glacier cooler to keep my water nice and chilled. Glacier coolers, simply the world's finest. Whether you're hunting, camping, or fishing, you'll enjoy smarter design, stronger construction, and superior insulation of Glacier coolers. Visit them at glaciercoolers.com, promo code TRUTH, save yourself 20%. And now let's get Dan on the line. All right, folks, we are live, and welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today, I'm pretty excited to bring to you another installment of the DIY Report mini-series. You know, in the past, we've covered everything from habitat management, bow tuning and setups, technique, and buying hunting property. And today, I have an awesome guest. It's a guy I'm sure nearly all of you know, if not every one of you. Is Dan Infalt, and we're going to be talking about hunting the wind in a variety of types of terrain and habitat, and that will be the consistency of our mini series here. And we're planning to do 3 parts. But first and foremost, Dan, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm hanging in there. I know we were talking a little bit before we started recording. It's this time of year is no rest for the wicked. It's time to get cranking, and no time to slow down, right?
Right.
So we'll go ahead and
Sleep's for weak-minded people that need that sort of thing.
I know. I hear that, man. It's if that's the case, man, then I am one tough SOB because I don't get a whole lot of it right now.
Yeah.
But we'll go ahead and jump into it, man. So first, thanks for coming on and doing this. And I know I'd mentioned when we were kind of talking a little bit before we started recording that I had this idea of wanting to do a mini series around hunting the wind in the different types of terrain. It really spawned from the idea that there's a bunch of different types of land that I hunt now, whether it's I'm hunting the eastern part of PA or going to Ohio or some of the western family properties that we have. They're all kind of different, and the wind seems to kind of I need to kind of hunt each one of them differently, especially kind of pertaining to the wind. And so when I started thinking about it, you were the first person that popped into my mind where it's like if I'm going to talk wind with somebody who knows their stuff and hunts all these different types of terrain on not managed properties. Then you would be the perfect person to have on. And kind of how I wanted to start was I wanted to ask you a 2-part question to kind of open, and it might seem, I guess, elementary to a lot of folks, but, you hear different guys talk about different approaches to setting up to hunting, different types of wind. Some guys will want to set up to, with the wind in their face, they'll want to kind of hunt a crosswind or whatever the case might be. I want to know, I guess, what is the first thing you consider when you start to dissect how wind might play on a piece of property?
This seems like 2 different questions.
Yeah. So,
but how I dissect it on a property is based a lot on the terrain. What the thermal wind's going to do, what the actual wind's going to do, what it's going to do when it hits breaks in the property and stuff like that. I take all that into consideration when I set out. Okay.
And so I guess let's talk a little bit about the terrain for a second. I guess, is that like your main, when you're thinking about you're walking onto, let's say we're talking farm country in this section, you're walking onto a piece of property, is terrain really like the main thing that you're focusing on when you walk onto a piece of farm country and kind of determining how the wind's going to play, where the blocks of timber are, where the open areas are?
No. The first thing I'm considering is where they're bedding. And how the wind plays into that. I mean, wind's critical, especially on farm country. But if you don't know where they're bedded on farm country, you're in trouble.
Right.
Most people think that bucks bed in the middle of woodlots, and some do. But mature bucks, when I find them at farm country, are usually, and I mean probably more than 95% of them, not in the big woodlots. If they are in the woodlots, they're on the very edge of them. And what they do in farm country that people don't get is they use that wind to back, and they watch downwind. So they'll be smelling the whole woodlot behind them, or whatever's behind them, and watching an opening. And they set up a lot to watch the one axis, because most people that go on farms always go in the same way. Mm-hmm. And, when I go scout farms for people, the majority of the big bucks I find, the buck sign, is right around the axis watching it. And that's not a coincidence. Mm-hmm. So you got to take that into consideration. That's easy to do based on the wind, because the wind's going to be to their back.
Okay.
So I'm considering where that buck's going to be based on the wind before I even enter that property.
Huh. Interesting. Okay.
I know you're more into the setups, but if you don't have that basic to it,
Right. Yeah. No. And I
The
think
rest of it don't make sense.
right. No, I think that makes sense. I think let's assume that we've found bedding, just kind of how you explained. What are, I guess, when you're walking on, so you're kind of understanding what the wind's doing, and how a buck might be, where they might be bedded before you kind of determine anything, right? And how the wind's going to play on that property, if I'm hearing you correctly, is going to kind of help dictate where you might look for buck beds. Let's just say, for example.
Right. And let's take one thing into consideration. I mean, if you're walking into a property like most people want to with the wind in your face, if you know bucks bed on the edge, the mature bucks bed on the edge watching the opening, you're walking right into their trap. You're walking into the wind and they're on that edge in front of you looking down. And the same goes into if you get the wind to your back and you walk into the back of that woodlot, he's going to smell you. So you have to come in from a side view, from a side where he's not watching and he's not smelling.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting, because it's I see how you say now that, because I would think that farm country would be a little easier. I think that's what most people would probably think, right? It's like, or probably the incorrect common knowledge would be it's a little easier to get on them, because they might be a little more, I don't want to say tame, but a little less on edge, right? Because farm country, it's not public, it maybe isn't quite as high pressure. And so they probably drop their guard a little bit, and to your point, they're walking in that open area, right? And they're thinking, the bucks are bedded further in, as you pointed out, or I'm going to walk in the backside, but their wind is blowing right to them at that point. So I guess, what are some variables that you'll look for in terms of trying to gain a wind advantage? I know the one thing you were talking about is access, right there, of kind of accessing on that crosswind. So that's like the one variable of like trying to get a leg up on the deer. What are a couple other things you kind of look for whenever you're trying to get a leg up on and using the wind to your advantage in those situations?
Well, I'm always considering where I believe the deer are bedded, or the target buck is bedded. So I'm using the wind and vision as my two biggest obstacles in farm country for getting in there. So I'm going to come in a way that I can't be seen, that I can't be smelled, which is usually from a side. It's hard on one-axis properties, but you can wait till you have the right wind.
Right. So with that, kind of playing on that access idea, in some pieces of farm ground, the access is a little easier than others, especially if they've got crops up still, corn or standing corn or what have you, that will provide a little bit of a screen for you. But what are, I guess, some of your kind of Dan Infalt tricks and tips for accessing farm country, especially when the crops come off and you've got a lot more kind of open land to kind of navigate?
Well, I'd rather go in with wind to the back, but have it just off of the bedding, so to one side or the other. So like if you think you're going in wind to back and you're heading straight towards bedding, it's not going to be blowing straight at the bedding. It's either going to be going a little to the left or a little to the right, and that's the way I'm going to hook in. Is the way it's going downwind. But I want that wind blowing towards them, because what they do is they bed on that field edge with the wind to their back, watching the field when the wind's to their back. But when the wind's blowing towards the woods, they're either on the other tree line on the backside, or they're at the first transition in, smelling where you were. So I'm trying to come in on the sides, and just really take into mind where they're going to be, instead of just haphazard going out there and jumping into the same stands over a food plot or something like that, and giving them the edge.
Right. Yeah. So it's it's funny, man, because it sounds like I'm thinking about some of the farms that I've hunted in the past, and I'm going, man, did I screw up those hunts?
It's a whole world of difference. I mean, for me in farm country, and I'm sure you know this because I know you follow the beast,
right?
But I sit back a lot and just watch, and don't go in there and hunt until something shows up, and I see how it's bedded, and I see how it's moving, and then I go in there. And a lot of times they're not exactly where I think they're going to be, but they usually are on like a tree line or some brush pile or something, and you're thinking, holy cow, how would I ever have gotten in here without knowing that?
Right. And
then I'm looking for them, like a lot of times when they get up on the edge of that field because they got the wind to their back, they got to get far enough away from that edge that you can kill them.
Right.
And they don't always do that. And sometimes it's a waiting game. And I see a lot has to do with the moon phase and how far they get. And a lot of it has to do with, cold fronts and things like that. And getting them to go far enough where you can get them into shooting range of some place where you can get to, whether it's because it's hidden by a hill or there's some trees blocking a view or something, is the ticket. And I'll just sit back and wait.
Yes, it's as you're talking, it's like I'm thinking about a couple things that I've seen either in the past seasons where I've hunted farm country, or even just recently. My dad picked up a property in western PA, kind of a smaller parcel, and I was there doing a little bit of work on it this past or I guess 2 weekends ago, and there was a buck that was bedded on the edge of a wood line right next to a road that kind of divided our wood lot from like the neighboring wood lot. And what you're kind of describing is exactly how I would have blown up a hunt this fall, because my plan, in all truthfulness, I have a fence line, an old barbed wire fence line that's just kind of run down, right? But they're still traveling it, and I've had cameras on it and watched them travel it. And there's an apple tree that kind of sits out at the end of that out the end of that fence line, and so I've had good deer on camera in there. And so I was like, you know what? I was like, this would be a great spot to hunt. I was like, but I'm not going to walk up this. There's a power line that kind of runs near there, and I was like, I'm not going to walk up the power line because I feel like the deer are moving kind of north and south on the property. It's like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk that road, as I'm going to perpendicular right into my stand, right?
Mm-hmm.
But where did I find that deer bedded? Basically, where I would perpendicular in at my stand.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I would have kind of screwed myself from the jump. So this is one question I kind of was thinking about, right? Because people would assume farm country is less pressured than public,
mm-hmm.
In general. Do you feel like when you're hunting farm country, do you feel like you can hunt a more iffy wind in those scenarios and get away with a little bit more, considering that there might be, or in theory, there should be less pressure?
To a point, I think mature bucks are pretty smart.
Right.
But I do think that when you get into more of the managed land,
mm-hmm.
like I've hunted ranches where there's only one guy hunting 800 acres and he's not shooting anything else. It's Boone and Crockett.
Mm-hmm.
You get to places like that, and I got 150-inch bucks walking by me like a year and a half old ones do on public, and acting the same. And it's like I don't know if it's the theory that stupid dies.
Right.
On public land, if you're not an intelligent animal, you're going to die, and then the smart ones are the ones breeding. I don't know if that's what it is, or if it's just that they don't have the experiences that the public land ones do. But
right.
They do make a lot more mistakes.
Right.
But still, when you start getting into that age group of 5 years old or older,
mm-hmm.
no matter where you're hunting those deer, those are intelligent deer, and they got that big by being smart and learning the area they live in.
Right. And playing the wind to their advantage. You know what I mean? Like whether
right.
it's moving with the wind to their back or wind in their face, whatever it is. And I'm sure, because I know I hear people talk about that, right? They saw a hammer buck come in with the wind to his back. You know what I mean? Or they, or guys will swear they only come in with the wind, the wind in their nose. I would think that that's based on what that deer has experienced in the past and what gives him the best opportunity to kind of sense danger based on how the wind, whether it's consistent or not in that area, and then also kind of dependent on what the thermals are doing, with that wind condition as well.
I see some movement in relation to wind and thermals,
mm-hmm.
But not as much as what some people portray it as. Like the lowest area in a field is where the mature bucks usually pop out, and a lot of people think that's because they're hidden there. Like hidden from the road or whatever, because that's the low area down there. But what it really is if you go out there in that field at the time frame that buck pops out in that field, and the thermals are starting to drop, you drop milkweed anywhere around that field, and it's going to go right to that spot where that buck pops out.
Right. Yeah.
It's the thermal drop.
Yeah.
So there's something to that, but that's because he's walking into an area he suspects danger, an open area.
Right.
It's just like when you get a tree stand, it's in a great spot, and you get some guy that camps there because every year he gets his buck there. I love that because you go 70 to 100 yards downwind into first heavy cover, and there's the heavy trail where the mature bucks are skirting around this guy to the downwind side.
Right.
So to use the wind, but I got to kind of chuckle every time I hear somebody say they always see them walking a crosswind, or they always see them tail the wind to tail, and that's the only way they travel in daylight, because that's all bull.
Right.
They're seeing that because they believe that, and that's what they're setting up for. You know what I mean? So I'm hunting bucks how they come out of bedding. So I'm seeing no regard to the wind at all. I see just as many walking wind to the face as wind to the tail as wind to the side, because I'm setting up on all those winds. And I'm just making sure that that wind ain't hitting that deer's nose. That's all I'm doing. I'm getting on the trail he wants to go on. That's a little different in the morning. In the morning, they're using the wind to go into the beds because they want to smell for the danger. It's kind of like circling that tree stand. They want to make sure that, they're safe. So when they go into a bed, they go downwind of it and smell the whole area before they go into it. That's what makes that beast hunting hard, is because the wind changes every day, for mornings, because that wind changes every day. So then try to predict exactly how he's going to come in from downwind. But when he leaves in the evening, it's pretty much no regard to the wind.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think guys probably too are kind of misreading the wind too, thinking that they're feeling the wind where they're at, saying that is the deer's tailwind, right? But I definitely, one thing that I know from listening to you and a bunch of times that you've kind of talked about wind is just when you're dropping that milkweed, it might be in your face where you're sitting, but if you watch that milkweed catch the air current and go to where the deer is, it might be doing something completely different there, right? So where you're watching the deer,
especially in like farmland or hill country, that wind varies all over that property. 100 yards from where you're at, it might be a 45-degree angle different.
Yeah.
And that's because of openings or because of hills, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm curious now, I wanted to get an example from you, right? So we're of course in farm country, and we're thinking of setting stand locations now at this point. What are, I guess, some go-to, and I know you're hunting, you're getting on beds and you're trying to figure out, where those deer are bedded, and that's really what you're planning to set up on. But, are there specific areas that you found in farm country that have kind of played out better than others, especially when you kind of take into consideration trying to make sure that you're playing the wind right?
I don't know. I think every situation is different and has to be evaluated. I can think of a few of my really good setups in farm country have been where they, come out of bedding and stage towards food to come in from a cross side and get to an old tree line or something and be able to slip up a tree at very low off the ground to just shoot over the low bushes from that crosswind where, they're watching downwind. If you entered that field, you couldn't get in there, but you could get in from the side. That's been real good for me. The trouble is a lot of times they're just at the edge of your range, because when you got a wind advantage from one way and a sight advantage from the other, it's really hard to get inside that window. So I'm trying to come in from the cross sides all the time.
Right. Which entails sometimes taking the long way around to get in and hunt them as well.
Correct.
So now that we've kind of covered, all these, various topics, is there anything that you feel is just like super, super important for considering hunting the wind in farm country specifically that we haven't kind of touched on at this point? Is there like the one thing, like if you're going to do one thing or remember one thing about hunting the wind in farm country, it's this thing?
We kind of touched on it, but the one thing you have to consider is why they bed in a certain position and where they would be bedded that day before you enter that woods. You can't just take that same trail from your truck to your stands every day and expect those bucks not to figure that out. You got to remember, a buck that's 5 or 6 years old that's been on the farm, it's a whole different animal than the rest of the deer on that farm. So that buck has been living on that farm for 4 or 5 years, or 3 or 4 years, and he didn't live there that long without figuring you out and figuring out your system. So you got to keep changing it up, moving around a lot, coming in from different ways and such. And the other thing is that a lot of guys get lulled into thinking they're doing things right because when you're in farm country, I mean, that's where the food is. That's where deer grow in heavy numbers. You have lots of deer around. They come from a long distance to get to the crops and stuff. And you see a lot of deer. So you think you're doing things right. But you really got to judge it on whether or not you're seeing target bucks, if that's your goal. And you got to hunt them like it's a whole different animal. And if you're not seeing those bucks, you're doing something wrong, and they've got you pegged. Because they're the ones that aren't making the mistakes when they're setting out. They're the ones that are bedding perfect and stuff. When you find that bed in the middle of the woods that, well, I could get next to this one, that's not a mature buck. When you look at a mature buck's bed, you're like, holy crap, how would I ever get close to this thing, especially in farm country. Right. That's how they set up. I mean, it's the wow factor when you actually look at their beds that, like, wow, how do I even get close to this thing? And really, you got to learn that property really well and learn how to get in and out of it from different ways and use other hunters to your advantage. If they're going in and doing the same things over and over again, I guarantee you that deer are patterning that. And all you have to do is find that little missing area that they're not focusing on.
Right. Yeah. So I thought that was going to be my last question for this section. But as you were talking, I thought of one other thing. It's just the other part, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is more of a question. I'm going to phrase it as a statement. But like, I would think that the other challenge too is that when you're in farm country, you're kind of condensing the deer, right, into certain pockets, right? Especially if you're in the Midwest, because it's, huge agricultural, ag fields with like blocks of timber, right, where the deer kind of have to live. So they don't get a chance really to spread out, right? And so you also have to kind of take into consideration not just where that buck's bedding, I think, right? It's also where are the does bedding, because they're probably not bedding too awful far away, and are you going to be blown up by your entrance based on where they're at too? Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, there's some truth to that. I mean, and when you get to heavy deer numbers, that's for sure there's some truth to that. However, I've never let that stop me from going in and going after a buck. I mean, if I kick those up, I hope they don't run by the buck and spook them. We call those satellite deer. That bed around the main bedding area. And I've had those does or small bucks run right through the bedding area, and you think, oh, crap. And you set up anyways, and the buck gets up before dark and comes by you anyways. I've had it happen several times, but I've also had it where they run through there and you see the target buck get up and run with them.
Right.
So, it's not something you want to do, but it's not the worst thing in the world. There's some ways to combat that. And the main way to combat that, I think, is to get in there really early in the day if you think you're going to kick other deer. And the reason for that is those bucks are sleeping, and they're a lot more lethargic in the middle of the day. And they're they're not already starting to get up or sitting in their bed alert or munching on the brush or their bed. They're actually kind of lethargic. So something runs by them, and they're like, well, what was that? And they have more of a tendency, in my opinion, and by my observations, to stay put in that bed if they're spooked a little bit during the middle of the day, and now they got a lot more time to calm down and just forget about it.
Right. That's a good point. You're kind of catching them at their most relaxed point of the day. They're in their bedding area where they're super comfortable in. And to your point, they're kind of lazed out, very similar to how I am in the at night whenever my daughter comes and tells me there's something scary outside our window, and I'm kind of half out of it. Same thing, not really interested in moving. Hope she's able to combat it herself, right?
right.
Awesome, man. Well, I think that kind of covers it for farm country, man. It's one of those things where I've been kind of thinking a lot about, just because there's some farms that I do hunt and wanted to get your perspective on it. So I do appreciate you taking some time to talk about it, and I'm looking forward to doing part 2.
Sounds good.
All right, folks, it's a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank Dan for joining. Be sure to visit his website, thehuntingbeast.com. It's literally like having access to a bunch of professors or a master's class in deer hunting from just about anywhere in the U.S. There's dudes from all over the country that are part of that group, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a group of more experienced and more or guys who are more willing to share the information that they've gained over the course of their hunting career. Also, be sure to join the Hunting Beast Facebook group as well. It's another great place to connect with some hardcore hunters. Dan is also releasing his own climbing sticks if you haven't already been made aware. These are specifically geared toward the mobile hunter, and you can find out more about these on the Hunting Beast and the Facebook group as well. I'll place